The journalist asked the question. John Wayne stopped mid-sentence, stood up, and never answered. It was April 1971. A television studio in Los Angeles. Warm lights. 2 chairs facing each other across a small table. Coffee cooling in cups either man had touched. The hum of cameras. The quiet rustle of a crew waiting for something interesting to happen. John Wayne sat in the interview chair. 63 years old. The lines on his face deeper now, carved by decades under desert suns and soundstage lights. He wore what he always wore off the ranch, a Western-style shirt, neckerchief, the uniform of the man America had decided he was. The journalist was younger. Early 40s. Ambitious. He'd done his research. He had questions about the new film, about Wayne's career, about politics and America and all the things John Wayne was expected to have opinions about. The interview had been going fine. Routine answers. Wayne's voice still carried that deliberate cadence, measured, unhurried, the rhythm of a man who'd learned long ago that silence held more power than volume. "You've played soldiers in dozens of films," the journalist said, glancing at his notepad. "Men who fought in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Your characters are defined by their service. By their sacrifice." Wayne nodded. "That's right. But you never actually served, did you?" The question hung in the air. Wayne's hands, resting on the armrests of his chair, didn't move. His expression didn't change. But something shifted in the room, a tightening, a held breath, the sense that a line had just been crossed. "I mean," the journalist continued, not quite reading the room yet, "you were the right age during World War II. You made films about the war while other men your age were fighting it. How did—" Wayne stood up. Not quickly. Not with anger. Just stood. His hands released the armrests. His body straightened to full height. And he looked down at the journalist with an expression that wasn't rage or indignation. It was something heavier than that. In 1971, during a live interview, John Wayne was asked about not serving in World War II, and the legendary actor stood up without finishing his sentence, walked out of the studio, and never answered that question again. The journalist's face went pale. "Mr. Wayne, I didn't mean to." Wayne didn't respond. He turned. Walked past the cameras. Past the crew members who suddenly found the floor very interesting. Out of the studio. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than any slam could have. The interview was over. That footage never aired. The network shelved it. The journalist's career stalled shortly after. And John Wayne never spoke about what happened in that studio. But to understand why he walked out, you need to understand what happened 30 years earlier. In 1941, John Wayne wasn't John Wayne yet. He was Marion Morrison, a working actor with a new stage name and a rising career in B-westerns. He'd just turned 34. He was married. He had 4 children. And he had a decision to make. Pearl Harbor had been attacked. America was at war. Every studio lot in Hollywood was hemorrhaging men, grips, cameramen, stuntmen, actors. They were enlisting. Shipping out. Trading soundstages for battlefields. Wayne wanted to go. The draft board classified him as 3A, deferred because he had dependents. But he could have enlisted anyway. Henry Fonda did. James Stewart did. Clark Gable did. Men with families, men with careers, men who walked away from everything because their country called. Wayne filled out the paperwork twice. Twice he tore it up. Republic Pictures had him under contract. They were making films, war films, morale films, propaganda films that the government wanted. "You're doing more good here," his studio head told him. "You're keeping spirits up. You're showing America what we're fighting for." It was true. It was also convenient. Wayne told himself he'd go after this next picture. After his contract expired. After his youngest turned 5. After. Always after. The war ended. Wayne never went. He spent the next 30 years playing the men who did. Marines landing on Iwo Jima. Cavalrymen fighting Apaches. Sergeants leading patrols through jungles. He became America's image of the warrior, the man who stands when others run, who does what's right no matter the cost. And every time he put on a uniform for the cameras, he felt it. The weight. The gap between the man he played and the man he was. Wayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Most people didn't know. The public saw John Wayne the icon, not Marion Morrison the man. His films made hundreds of millions. His image sold war bonds, inspired recruits, gave comfort to Gold Star mothers who saw in his characters a version of the sons they'd lost. But Wayne knew. The real veterans knew too. Some of them worked on his films, stuntmen who'd been at Normandy, extras who'd survived Guadalcanal. They never said anything directly. But Wayne could feel it in the way they looked at him. A distance. A question that never quite formed into words. In 1949, Wayne visited a VA hospital in San Diego. Studio publicity. Shake some hands. Boost morale. He walked through wards filled with men his age, men missing limbs, men with burns, men staring at ceilings and seeing things that had happened years ago but would never stop happening. One of them, a Marine sergeant named Frank Mitchell, recognized Wayne. "Hey," Mitchell said from his wheelchair, his voice raspy from smoke inhalation at Tarawa. "You're John Wayne." "That's right." Mitchell studied him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "What outfit were you with?" Wayne's jaw tightened. "I wasn't. I didn't serve." Mitchell nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. He just looked at Wayne with an expression that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite pity. Something in between. Something that said, "I know what you are." Wayne left that hospital and didn't do publicity visits to VA wards again. The guilt lived in him like a stone. It sat in his chest during interviews when reporters asked about his war films. It rose in his throat at military ceremonies when generals thanked him for inspiring a generation of servicemen. It pressed against his ribs every time someone called him a hero. He wasn't a hero. He played heroes. There was a difference, and he knew it better than anyone. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. By 1971, Wayne had made peace with most of his demons. He'd survived cancer. He'd won an Oscar. He'd become more than an actor. He'd become a symbol, for better or worse, of something America wanted to believe about itself. But he hadn't made peace with World War II. That question, "Why didn't you serve?" had been asked before. Quietly. Carefully. Usually by journalists who knew better than to push. Wayne had developed a standard answer. "I had a family. I had obligations. The studio needed me here." All technically true. All incomplete. Most interviewers accepted it. They didn't press. John Wayne was 63 years old and dying of the same cancer that had almost killed him before. You don't interrogate a dying man about his regrets. But this journalist, young, ambitious, convinced he was asking the hard questions everyone wanted answered, didn't know when to stop. How did you reconcile that? He'd been about to ask when Wayne stood up. Playing soldiers when you'd never been one? Taking credit for valor you never showed? He never finished the question. But Wayne had heard it anyway. Heard it in the tone. Heard it in the assumption that Wayne owed anyone an explanation for choices made 30 years ago when the world was different and the stakes felt impossible to calculate. Wayne walked out of that studio and got into his car. His driver asked where he wanted to go. Wayne said, "Home," and then didn't speak for the rest of the 40-minute drive. Away from the cameras, Wayne made a choice no one expected. That night, Wayne sat in his study. He pulled out a box he kept in his desk, a box he'd been carrying from house to house for decades. Inside were letters. Hundreds of them. Letters from mothers whose sons had died in places like Normandy and Saipan and the Chosin Reservoir. Letters saying thank you for making films that helped them understand what their boys had gone through. Letters from veterans saying Wayne's movies helped them explain to their families what war was like. Letters from young men who'd enlisted because they'd watched Sands of Iwo Jima and wanted to be like Sergeant Stryker. Wayne read them all. Every one. He'd read them before, dozens of times over the years. But he read them again that night. One letter stood out. It was from Frank Mitchell, the Marine sergeant from the VA hospital in 1949. The one who'd asked what outfit Wayne had been with. The one whose look had cut deeper than any words could. The letter had arrived in 1952, 3 years after their encounter. Wayne almost hadn't opened it, afraid of what it would say. Mr. Wayne, I want to apologize for how I looked at you in the hospital. I was angry. I was hurting. I wanted to hurt someone back, and you were there. But I've been thinking about it. About your films. About the Marines who watched them before we shipped out. About the guys in my platoon who used to quote Sergeant Stryker to each other when things got bad. You didn't carry a rifle. You didn't storm beaches. But you gave us something to hold on to. A version of ourselves that was braver than we felt. Better than we were. Maybe that mattered too. I don't know if you'll ever read this. But if you do, I want you to know, I understand now. You fought your war the way you could. That's more than nothing. Semper Fi. Frank Mitchell. Wayne had carried that letter in his wallet for 19 years. He pulled it out now, unfolding the worn paper carefully. He sat in his study until dawn, reading and rereading those words. And he understood something he'd been too proud, too guilty to understand before. Forgiveness doesn't require permission. It requires acceptance. But what followed would stay with everyone who witnessed it, forever. 3 weeks after the aborted interview, Wayne was scheduled to appear at a military ceremony, the dedication of a memorial for Marines killed at Khe Sanh. He almost canceled. His health was failing. The cancer was winning. He didn't want to be that symbol anymore, the fake soldier honored by real ones. But something made him go. The ceremony was small. A few hundred people. Marines in dress blues. Families of the fallen. A granite wall with names carved into stone. Names of men who'd been 20 years old when they died, younger than Wayne's own children. The commandant gave a speech. He mentioned Wayne. A man who showed America what our Marines stand for. Courage. Honor. Sacrifice. Wayne stood when his name was called. He walked slowly to the podium, feeling every one of his 63 years, feeling the weight of the oxygen bottle his doctor had told him to carry but which he'd refused. He looked out at the faces. The mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the Marines who'd survived. And he made a decision. I need to say something. Wayne began, his voice rougher than it used to be, scarred by surgery and radiation and too many cigarettes. Something I should have said a long time ago. The crowd quieted. I never served, Wayne said simply. I was the right age during World War II. I could have gone. I didn't. I made films instead. And I've spent 30 years playing men braver than I ever was. You could have heard a pin drop. I don't know if that was the right choice, Wayne continued. I've asked myself that question every day since 1945. But I know this, I spent 3 decades trying to honor you. Trying to show the world what you did. What you sacrificed. And if my films helped even one person understand what you went through, then maybe it wasn't entirely wasted. He paused. Pulled something from his jacket pocket. Frank Mitchell's letter. Worn. Folded 100 times. A Marine wrote this to me in 1952. He forgave me for something I never forgave myself for. And today, standing here, I'm finally ready to accept that. Wayne placed the letter at the base of the memorial. Against the granite. Among the flowers. I wasn't one of you, he said quietly. But I tried to remember you. That's all I could do. I hope it was enough. The crowd stood. Not in applause. In respect. In understanding. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. John Wayne died 8 years later. Frank Mitchell's letter was found in his jacket pocket. He'd carried it every day since that ceremony. The journalist who asked the question never interviewed Wayne again. Years later, he said he finally understood, some men answer with their lives. John Wayne answered with his silence. And sometimes, silence is the most honest answer of all.